Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. Every cop has a bump in the night story. Sometimes those bumps happen in broad daylight. Today I'm talking to a veteran homicide and cold case detective from Kansas City named Stuart Littlefield. Detective Littlefield was recommended to me because he's a great storyteller and he has a great story that might actually include an encounter with a ghost. Now, even if you don't believe in that kind of thing, it seems that as human beings, we can't get enough of those strange, unexplainable stories, and the detective and I talk a bit about that too. Here's Detective Stuart Littlefield. Hello, Detective. How are you today?
Fine, Jared. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Halloween is coming up soon, and I brought you in to tell us a few spooky stories. There are officers in our department who believe that the headquarters building that we have is haunted, or at least that neighborhood maybe is haunted. There's a hotel across the street. Do you hear those kind of stories? What do you think of that?
I've heard stuff, never experienced it.
Because you've worked in that building for how long?
Well, since we moved in there, sometime around 2000. I know there's the exact date we moved in.
Most of your career, you worked in that building.
Yes. Before that, I worked in City Hall, which was built in the late 60s, early 70s. I've never seen or heard anything about a ghost in there. The hotel across the street, which I think was the Grand Street Hotel, I've never heard anything about that. But I've never, ever experienced anything weird.
Okay.
Weird.
So you're not naturally inclined to see a ghost around every corner?
Oh, no. Not at all.
Do you think a lot of cops are superstitious?
You know what? I'm superstitious because it's fun.
Okay.
You know, if I hand you a knife, you have to give it back in the same condition I gave it to you. If I gave it to you open, you have to give it back open. If I gave it to you closed, we don't use the Q word. I have been burned by the Q word so many times that you're not allowed to use the Q word. And so we're superstitious in that area, but I don't think we are the kind of people that, carry talismans now I do carry my academy knife. There are a couple times I've forgotten this, and I'll go back and get it because this is the knife I got in the academy, and it's been with me every day since then. Okay. So I will go home and get my academy knife or my St. Michael medallion.
Okay.
I won't come to work without it.
You raised Catholic?
I was not. I converted when I was 30.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So most cops are probably not lucky rabbit's foot in their pocket, but maybe on some things like not saying the Q word on a night that's not very busy.
And we all carry knives. We don't ever use them. Everybody carries a knife. Everybody. I use mine to open letters. Yeah, and at home to cut boxes and string. But I carry one.
Yep.
With a pocket clip. Got to have a knife.
Yep. Yeah. Well, only when I'm wearing pants.
Yeah. Or a kilt.
Yes. That's some of the best knives I've seen are bagpipers.
Yes.
With their kilts, and they've got some daggers or some dirks or whatever they're called, and so yeah. So most cops probably aren't that superstitious, but it's not unusual if I'm standing around with a bunch of cops for them to mention stories where they've been spooked and that kind of thing. What's your take on that? Do you feel like it's because you guys are constantly exploring and investigating into unknown areas, or is it that you're around death a lot, or why do you think cops are? Why are they interested? Why are they listening to this podcast right now?
I think that maybe we are, because of our investigatory nature. We always want to look into the unknown. Maybe. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm certainly not a psychologist or a therapist. But, we always want to figure stuff out. And there's a lot of stuff out there we can't figure out at all. I've been around a lot of dead bodies. Actually, I fished with some guys, and we were sitting around table playing cards. And one guy, and they're not cops. They don't know much about the cop life. And one guy said, "Well, how many dead bodies have you seen?" And I had to think. I said, well, it's really not the kind of thing you count. And I said, well, what are we talking about here? I said, all dead bodies are just murders. And his eyes kind of got bigger. And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you have naturals, you have fatality car accidents, you have murders, you have SIDS deaths, and you have suicides.
Yeah.
So
accidental deaths and other.
Yes. Yeah. So, and he never really thought about, well, how many dead bodies? I have no idea. I've never counted them. There's been a lot.
Yeah.
Don't have a clue, but we're around a lot of death. I haven't had any supernatural experiences while I've been around dead people. The worst part is usually the smell. And that's really the only thing I can say that I could have ever taken away from a crime scene was the smell that gets up in your nose.
Yeah. 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 Do you ever dream about the dead bodies?
No, but I will tell you this, and I don't know how many cops are listening, but every cop has the shooting dream.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's one of two dreams and they've all had it. Yeah, and it's been my experience. You have one or the other. So the first dream is the one I have. I can't pull the trigger. I wake up in a complete panic. I'm in a situation where I need to shoot this guy and I can't pull the trigger no matter how hard I try. The other dream that I don't have is the bullet rolls out of the barrel or you shoot somebody and it has no effect.
Yeah.
Every cop has one of those two shooting dreams. I haven't talked to anybody that has ever had both.
Yep. In fact, if you want to hear me talk to a psychologist about exactly that, episode 95 is 095 is the episode where I talk about the dreams that cops have, and we talked about exactly that. Talk to me just a little bit about your career as a detective.
Well, I started off, as everybody does, on the night squad.
Okay.
And I worked true midnight to 8. I came in at 11:45, and I went home at 8 in the morning. And
you're actually doing like cold case or something.
I'm in cold case now.
Okay, all right.
So in 2011, I moved to the homicide unit. I've worked in what we call persons crimes, which is anything that can happen to a person: rape, robbery, shooting, stabbing, domestic battery. And I can tell you my sexual assault cases of everything I've done have meant more to me than anything I've ever done, because you talk about a victim that matters. Yeah. Those victims matter. And if you do a good job, and I don't mean a good investigation, if you just show you care about them and that they matter, I can tell you stories where I lost the case, but I helped victims get off the streets and reconnect with their families. Greatest case I ever worked. Guy was found not guilty, but that victim was living under a bridge and was a prostitute. And I helped her get her driver's license back. I helped her get a job. She's reconnected with her family and she works now. Yeah. And greatest case and I'm still in contact with her. Yeah. This was from 2010. She still reaches out every now and then. That guy was found not guilty, and that's the greatest case I've ever worked.
Yeah. Tell me about gang signs.
Okay. This is the story that you reminded me of when you said anything that made your hair stand on end. So this was April of 1999, and it was the date of the Columbine massacre. And I knew that because when I got back to the office, I saw it on the news. So at the time, I was in the SCORE unit. Which is our SWAT team. The SWAT team, yes. Yep. And half of the unit was working nights and they were doing aggressive street patrol. And the other half worked days. And we had a big gang problem. And so the chief said, make the SCORE guys do it. So anything that new that came up or any problem, it was, hey, have the SCORE guys do it.
There probably wasn't a gang officer or gang unit at that time.
No. We had one detective named Frank Moss who took it upon himself to learn about gangs. And so the four of us that were on days with the SCORE unit just started learning about gangs, talking to gang members, working gang crimes, just kind of OJT. Yeah. 2 community policing officers, and I'm going to throw their names out because I'm mad at them. Jason Zager and Matt Cross. Jason is no longer a cop. He went on to bigger and better things, and Matt Cross is still a sergeant. And so they were in community policing, and they told me about a house off of 31st and Tennyson, which is downtown, but kind of midtown if you were looking at our city overall. Okay. And so they said there was a house with some gang graffiti on it. And so we were trying to document gang graffiti. And so they took me to this house. I jumped into their community policing car, which was a black and white Caprice without a cage. And so we get to the house, and on the front of the house, and it's an abandoned house, is a giant, and I mean probably 4 foot wide, 6-pointed star. And it had pitchforks radiating out between the points of the star and a big G in the middle, which is indicative of the Folks gang. At the time, we had Bloods and Crips and the Folks gang also. And so the back of the building were their gang names. And I had a Polaroid camera. This is how long ago this was. And so all I was going to do is take some pictures. And I remember there was still some snow on the ground. It was cold out. And so that's important. So I got my Polaroid camera out and I stood at the edge of the front porch and I took a picture of that with the pitchforks and the Star of David. And if you remember the Polaroid cameras, you had to wait a minute for them to develop.
Yes.
And so instead of waiting...
Those of us over 45-ish remember waving undeveloped Polaroids, waiting for the picture to appear. And so
that's exactly...
It starts out really washed out, and then it slowly becomes what you think of as a normal photograph. Yeah.
Exactly. So I put it in my shirt pocket, and I walked around to the back of the house, and I took a picture of the gang names on the backside. And that would have been enough time for the picture to develop. So I pulled the picture out of my pocket and it was completely black. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird.
Left the lens cap on. Yeah.
Didn't have a lens cap, but I thought, it had been in my car all winter. So I thought the film had frozen.
Sure. Yeah. It's chemical. I mean, yes. The chemicals could be bad. Right.
So while I'm waiting and I'm looking at this picture, the picture of the back of the house developed. Well, okay, I'm an idiot. I had my thumb over the lens. I mean, why else would that picture not develop and then the other picture did?
Sure.
So I walked back to the front of the house, stood in the exact same spot, and this is early afternoon, broad daylight. I took a picture of that Star of David again, and while I'm waiting, it wouldn't develop.
0 for 2, with a good one in between.
Yes. And Matt and Jason are right next to me. Jason's a great big guy. And I'm not a big guy at all, so they're both bigger than me. And they got more spooked than I did. And they took off and left me. I heard them. Matt and Jason are running to their car to leave me at the crime scene. Or at the scene. What a crime scene. They tried to leave me there, and I had to chase them down the street. That's why I gave their names. They were going to leave me there. And I had to chase them down and jump in the back of the car. And they left me. And somewhere, I still have those 3 pictures.
Really?
I don't know if I could find them if I had to, but I kept those with me for the longest time. Yeah. And I cannot explain why that picture wouldn't develop. Have no idea.
How weird.
Yeah, yes.
The cursed gang sign.
No idea why.
Wow. So I'm trying to formulate a thought, and maybe there's a question in here somewhere. I'm trying to put my finger on why do we like ghost stories? Why is that satisfying to us? And I wonder if there's not something about you can't go help every victim. And you're working cold cases right now. And at some point, an officer said, I've done everything I can do. And we're at a dead end. And I don't know what to do beyond this. We're going to have to move on. And that's got to be pretty unsatisfying. That's got to be frustrating, and maybe that officer can put that out of his mind and move on to the next thing. But still, that was not a win.
The frustrating ones for me aren't the ones that I couldn't solve. They're the ones that I knew who did it, and I couldn't prove it.
Yeah.
And there are cases that collectively in the cold case unit, we know who did it, absolutely, but there is no evidence to prove who did it. And those are the ones that frustrate me. I think that you learn to live, or I'm going to have to learn to live with a certain amount of frustration, hoping that 10 years from now, we have really good DNA science right now. I'm hoping that down the road, we get better DNA science. Right now, we're beginning to get DNA on spent shell casings, which was unheard of 5-10 years ago. And so that's going to clear up some cases after I retire. But I'm excited to see what's going to happen 5-10 years in the future, where they can get DNA, touch DNA, or something I don't even know about. And we'll go back and solve even more cases.
All right. So really, I brought you here to tell me the story of the woman that you never saw, but you heard.
I've been a cop for 30 years. And one of my very first off-duty jobs was working security at JIAC, the Juvenile Intake and Assessment Center.
Okay.
So I started there probably my rookie year, and I worked in the daytime because I was a midnight cop. At the time, JIAC was located at 6th and Cheromey, which is right downtown next door to our city hall.
Okay.
A few years later, they moved to the old St. Margaret's Hospital, which is at 8th and Vermont, which is just a few miles to the south. St. Margaret's opened sometime in the 1800s as a hospital. And then sometime in the 70s, they merged with Providence Hospital, which had closed down, and the entire operation moved out to 90th and Parallel to the west end of town, and it's still Providence Hospital today.
So moved from the old part of town to the new part of town, but the old building was still there.
It was still there, and all the utilities were still there, and a lot of the hospital stuff was still there. So JIAC occupied the first floor.
Okay.
And anytime a juvenile was arrested that wasn't going to the juvenile detention center, they would be processed through JIAC. And they had a off-duty officer working security. And I worked there a couple days a week in the mornings. And when I got bored, if nothing was going on, I would walk the halls for exercise. And I remember one day, I remember it was hot out. That's all I can tell you. I was walking the floors and I went upstairs. I don't remember what floor it was. Let's just say it was the 8th floor. And I came out of the stairway, and before the door even shut, I heard footsteps. Just click, 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 click. And I could tell they were walking away from me. And they were specifically high heel shoes, like a woman walking in high heel shoes.
Okay.
Like my mom did. But there was nobody in the hallway. And it lasted 10 or 15 seconds and then faded off into nothing. And the door shut, and I walked down the hallway, always carried a flashlight, and I was looking in the rooms. Even though they were lit and the windows were open, there was nobody on the floor. And I thought it was odd. So I went back downstairs to JIAC, and there was a girl in the admin office named Brittany. And I said, hey, the weirdest thing just happened to me. And she said, what happened? I said, well, I was upstairs, and as I walked onto the floor, I heard a woman walking away from me in high-heeled shoes. And she said, very matter-of-factly, oh, you must have been on the 8th floor. How'd you know? And she said, there's a ghost up there. What are you talking about? And she said, well, several people, not Brittany, but several people had seen a woman in a nursing uniform on the 8th floor. And she would appear and disappear. Never talked to anybody that saw her. Never saw her myself. But I can tell you, before the door shut, because I held it open, I heard a woman walking away from me on the 8th floor. It is now some type of a residency center. I think they have apartments there.
Okay.
Haven't been back since then. But that was my one main experience with maybe a ghost.
Like, what was that?
Yeah, it was the weirdest thing. And but she said people there had seen a nurse on the 8th floor.
You know, modern hospitals are well lit and wide hallways and wide doors. I assume that probably wasn't the case.
It kind of was.
Did it have elevators? Or were you going upstairs?
So no, they had an elevator in there, but I never took the elevator because I wanted exercise.
Okay.
When I went to walk, I always took the stairs. So sometime after St. Margaret's was opened, they had added elevators. But as I got off the stairway, it was a relatively wide hallway, maybe 8 feet wide, maybe 10. Linoleum floor. I remember there was a green pattern, and the walls were tile, so everything echoed. And that's what was weird is I heard those click, 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 click footsteps. And as they got quieter, I could tell whoever it was at the end of the hallway and was gone. But I could see all the way down. A little bit of shadow, but we left the windows open. And so even though you go into a hospital room that still had things in it, you know, it was well lit.
Have you had anybody corroborate that? Other officers went to JIAC during that time. Anybody else run into anything unexplained? You know,
I don't ever remember talking to anybody about it because when I left, there was a gap, so I didn't always see my relief, you know. So I don't think I've ever really told that story to anybody. Maybe at the time I did. It wasn't monumental enough for me to say, guess what happened to me? It's just one of those things that happened. It was kind of weird.
I'm trying not to ask you yes and no questions. Have you ever worked with a cop that is easily spooked? That's yes or no. Can you give me an example?
Jason Zager and Matt Cross tried to lead me on a crime scene. They were easily spooked.
Do you always know who that's going to be? Can you get to know a person personality-wise and know if they're going to be easily spooked?
You do. What they're mainly spooked about are bugs or snakes.
Really?
That's the main thing for cops.
Nothing supernatural.
Not really at all. I don't know anybody that hasn't had some type of a bump in the night story.
Right.
So we all might get spooked or might dismiss it. But I'm telling you, the cops that I know, They're afraid of spiders or snakes.
Detective, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jared. It was great to be here, and I hope you call again sometime.
I'm so grateful to Detective Littlefield for coming in today and sharing his bump in the night stories. I think the reason that I enjoy making these ghost story themed episodes is because there are so many law enforcement stories that are so sad and so tragic. There's nothing fun or funny about them. So just like gallows humor, we need a ghost story every once in a while. We need to laugh in the face of death, and then maybe set a new land speed record, hightailing it out of there. It's good for us. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. This show is free for everyone because of those supporters who are quietly helping behind the scenes. If you want to help this show reach more cops, chaplains, and other first responders around the world, then please support the show by following the link in the episode description. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.